Welcome to the Spoony Struggle. This is your host, Jessica. I'm a neuropsychologist and longtime spoonie with Ehlers Danlos, POTS, and a whole host of other syndromes. This show is about the raw, honest look at living life with chronic illness and pain, especially those that are difficult to diagnose and less well known and understood. Full disclosure, any information discussed in this podcast is strictly the opinion of the host and of the guests and is for informational purposes only. It is not meant as medical advice and should not be taken as such. Always consult with your doctor and medical team. Living with chronic illness can be hard. If you ever find yourselves or someone you love in crisis and need someone to talk to, you can always call the National Suicide Hotline Support Lifeline at 1-800-273-TALK. They offer free and confidential support in the USA 24/7. And now, the Spoony Struggle. Welcome to the Spoony Struggle. This is your host, Jessica. Today we discuss Lewis Temple's Spoony Struggle. Welcome, Lewis.
Hey, Jessica.
It's a pleasure to have you today. I'm really excited to have everyone hear your Spoony Struggle today. The first question that I wanted to ask is, what is your current pain level from 0 to 10?
3, 4 right now. I mean, that question is stupid overall, considering that, I have various conditions that can make the pain range up to like 7 or 8, as far as whether it's a headache or lower back pain or knee pain or, eye pain or jaw pain. Fun stuff. It doesn't make any sense with your current pain level. It's like, well, which part of me? I just, I can understand for acute things, like you just had surgery or you just broke your arm or leg or something. And they're like, hey, what's your pain level now? After we, give you an injection of morphine because your leg was bleeding out because you broke it in half. It's a little probably easier to calculate, I suppose, than to a chronic pain sufferer.
So what are your current diagnoses and associated conditions?
So for physical ailments, I have Ehlers Danlos or something very similar to it that they're not sure. They're still not really sure what the gene is that causes the hypermobile EDS anyway. So it could be a whole plethora of various genetic anomalies that are causing the issues, but it's still, being studied and researched, so no one really knows. So with the new criteria, they said with the new criteria, technically not HEDS, but it's like pretty much exactly the same treatment-wise and issues associated with it. So it's pretty much the same thing. So so for simplicity's sake, I'll just say, because I have had a diagnosis of hypermobile EDS, that I have hypermobile EDS. The associated issues with that or conditions would be POTS, which is not fun. Don't have a diagnosis for MCAS, although it's a very common one with EDS. I have just recently found out I have something called craniocervical instability and atlantoaxial instability. So chronic neck pain, chronic head pain, migraines, eye pain, jaw pain, lower back pain. My knees dislocate. It hurts.
How long did it take until you finally got a proper diagnosis?
Years. I mean, with the EDS, I had dislocated my knee and stuff spontaneously, and had other like back pain issues and such since I was, before I was a teenager. Just got worse as I got older. I mean, when I was younger and was able to be more physically fit, for whatever reason, I kind of held it at bay. So yeah, it probably wasn't until I had some kind of diagnosis, or at least suspicion of a diagnosis, until I was around 23 when I was having wrist pain, and a physical therapist noticed that I could do some pretty crazy bendy things with my joints and told me that you should look into this. And that kind of led me down the path because I had never heard of it before.
So similar to my story. I swear physical therapists are amazing. And if you have questions, just ask them and maybe they can guide you toward a diagnosis, because that's what ours did.
Yep. Yeah, indeed. I've been very surprised that they know that stuff so well. And unfortunately, many medical doctors do not really understand it.
Nope. But it seems like the physical therapists do. So thank God for them. Were there any misdiagnoses along the way?
Yeah, I had a rheumatologist was like, yeah, you don't have Ehlers Danlos. Maybe you have Marfan's. And yeah, no, I don't have Marfan's. So, and then it was kind of like became a moot point once like my wrist felt better. But really, so regarding the Ehlers Danlos, I kind of was able to figure it out because eventually I did find a rheumatologist who reevaluated me and was like, oh, yeah, you're most likely hypermobile EDS, and went with that diagnosis. So that wasn't too difficult once I actively pursued it. Now, with things like craniocervical instability, atlantoaxial instability, that had some issues going on for a while because I had like suspicion of potentially having multiple sclerosis and other things during these flare-ups. I had MRIs and neurologists took a look and they're like, well, it's definitely not MS. I don't know. And those two diagnoses are incredibly difficult to find someone who's familiar with and doesn't just think you're, making it up. And thankfully, I live pretty close, to one of the experts in the country, if not like the world, in this type of condition. And so I was able to see them and thankfully get proper diagnosis, analysis, and get some kind of at least basic treatment right now.
I think probably your biggest misdiagnosis was hypochondria.
That is true. Yeah, they said a lot of it was somatization disorder and such, which, I believe that can be a legit thing for sure. When I'm focused and when I'm ruminating on the pain, don't have something in front of me, yes, the pain is certainly worse and it's much more difficult to deal with. However, it's still there and things are still an issue, and like things like the weakness and and the headaches and such, those are like a little bit more suspect. I don't understand why they like to just jump to the somatization and it's all in your head when they probably do not really have much of a psychological field education.
So let's get a little bit more into it. Tell us your chronic illness and diagnosis story.
Well, the earliest I noticed that something was weird was when I first dislocated my knee. I was simply sitting in bed, lying on my side, just reading a story. When I just started to roll over, I was kind of laying on my side, kind of on my stomach. Sometimes I did that. And when I rolled over, the knee just slipped right out of the socket and went right over, and it hurt, but also it locked. And I remember I stood up I couldn't put any pressure on it or weight on it because it hurt so much. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can't bend my knee or my leg. I don't know what's going on, because I wasn't really expecting that because it was not really a traumatic incident. So I remember trying to get attention to my mom. I didn't know where she was and everything, and eventually it just popped back into place by itself. And I was like, oh, I don't know what that was. Didn't really know how to describe it. And then it happened again about a week later when I was playing with my friend on his trampoline. But that one, it popped back in pretty quickly, even quicker than last time. But that was the last time I don't know why I never did it again until I was much older. When I got to be in college is when I noticed it again. I realized that I could, look like I realized how weak my knee was when I straightened out my leg and could just kind of push my finger on it and dislocate it. I'm like, that never really went away, did it? So a lot of these things had some weird suspicions. Also the fact that I could do these crazy maneuvers with my body and scare people, I used to do, where I could take my arm and pretty much my shoulder subluxes out and I can kind of wrap the arm around my head completely and then touch the ear. And it's really hard to describe exactly how I perform this, but I don't do it anymore because now I realize that it's actually causing me to damage the joints every time I do that. I stop, and I recommend people with EDS or suspect of having EDS to stop doing those parlor tricks because it's going to wear you out real fast. So like I said, with the EDS side, also growing up, I do remember a lot of times kind of semi-passing out from standing up real suddenly, such as lying on my back and then just kind of getting up doing a stretch or just going for, running out of the room. And then all of a sudden everything kind of grays out and kind of flop on the floor or something briefly. Or I catch myself in time and I kind of lean up against a wall or something. A lot of that stuff kind of has gotten worse as I've gotten older. And so, and being the kind of person I am I can be very connected to my body, but also very, very clueless sometimes about what's going on or reluctant to seek treatment more until recently. My concern was because I had learned that Ehlers Danlos, if I had it, sometimes could have complications with the heart. So that kind of gave me some anxiety and wanted me to pursue it more in depth and be insistent. So went to that rheumatologist who was like, maybe you have Marfan's. And, I went to got echocardiograms, stress tests, I think once too, because they thought there was like a false alarm where they thought something was going on. And when they did the stress echocardiogram, it was fine, stuff like that. So a lot of that kind of ruled out a lot of the more serious things. So it kind of put me at ease. And that's why I didn't seek further quote unquote treatment for a while until I started having more and more back pain, headaches. I started to develop much more finger pain, even got trigger finger in one of my hands, and just kind of being tired and fed up and being like, okay, let's try to see what we can do about this, because my quality of life is kind of going downhill. So I, went to another rheumatologist after moving to a different state, after switching jobs and everything, and told her about previous suspicions of the diagnosis, but wasn't too sure, wanted to make sure everything was okay and I was getting the proper treatment. And and she seemed to take me seriously and was like, oh yeah, probably Ehlers Danlos. Hey, if you want, you can go to a geneticist and they can kind of give you a better answer. Geneticist I went to, apparently he's not even there anymore. Kind of did me a once over and kind of looked at me in some ways, but I feel like, she definitely didn't have good bedside manner, and feel like in some way she didn't ask me certain other questions that could have led to the diagnosis. I don't know. It was all very confusing because everything I had read and heard about before changed when that new diagnostic criteria changed. And it kind of threw a lot of things, off. Again, I'm not trying to say I'm some kind of an expert in this, but so they changed the criteria. So they put a lot more stress on the hereditable factor. So if you didn't have previous family or current family that seemed to be suffering from it, it didn't give you as high of a place in the likelihood of a diagnosis, even though I do have like some of the associated things. And then I went to see that one an electropulmonologist or electrocardiologist who said, yeah, you have some kind of a dysautonomia, but didn't really give it a name like POTS or something, because I never actually like passed out to the point where I flopped down on the ground, I guess, and was completely blacked out. I don't think it technically needs to get that bad. So yeah, then I kind of just pushed through it a couple of years, but then just chronic pain kind of got worse and worse and worse over the years. Then I was starting to have my brain fog was getting worse, started getting dizzy more often. It really hit the fan about a year ago. Just kind of looking up and down and everything, doing my job, started to make me feel very dizzy and nauseated, and then was triggering these horrible neck spasms and back of the head pain. And I'm just like, I don't know what's going on, like how my body's like falling apart. I'm only 33. So that's when I was like, I had to kind of look furthermore. Like, I don't know what I can do, because I can't freaking, sit for a prolonged period without my back pain being really bad. Can't stand for terribly long without back pain being bad or foot pain. So it's kind of like, okay, I can't sit, stand. It's very difficult. So that's why I started seeking other things. I'm like, okay. And then I'd seen a neurologist who's like diagnosed me with migraines, because it's probably the easy, obvious thing. But I'm like, I don't have a significant history of migraines though. I get headaches, and they've been gradually getting worse and worse and worse over the last few years. So that's when that led me to go. So then my one doctor, when I was complaining about the hand pain and everything like that, she recommended me go and see a physical therapist regarding hand therapy. Going there and told him about the Ehlers Danlos diagnosis and everything, and the physical therapist looking over me, she was the one that recommended, hey, you might want to see this doctor. He is an expert in this thing called CCI, craniocervical instability. And I'm not saying you have it, but it couldn't hurt to get evaluated, because it's a very common thing with people with hypermobile joints. So that's what led me to go and seek them out. And I'm glad I did, because they were like, the symptoms seem to fit. Let's do some imaging and go over some of that. And the imaging generally seemed to fit the symptoms and everything. And the treatment, being a neck brace, really does help. And it was like a miracle thing. It's not certainly a perfect solution, but it does help right now. And I'm still trying to work with PT and trying to find things that don't trigger additional pain or anything, and still try to treat it conservatively in order to stave off for at least some time surgery. The only thing I can think of that, despite having EDS, usually there's some type of a trauma that generally triggers CCI-AAI. Not always, though. But that's what the neurosurgeon had asked me several times, was trying to think back if I was in a car accident, things, because apparently that's a very common trigger, is getting like a whiplash injury, something of that sort. The only thing I could think of, even though I was in a car accident when I was in 5th grade, and I smacked my head on the middle section between the two front seats. There in that car way back in the 90s had like a section there, and the seatbelts only went around your waist at that time in that car. So when we hit the car, I stayed in place, or at least my hips did, but the top of me went down like a lever and smacked my head right on there. So there was that, left a nice big mark on my head. And on at least 2 occasions when body surfing, I got hit by a wave really hard and twisted my neck like around real good. And I remember feeling like, a little bit, but I guess because of how flexible I am, it didn't do anything at the time, it seemed to. And probably just working the tough jobs I did just kind of wore it out. So
along your journey, did you find that the doctors listened to you when you told them your symptoms?
I feel like some doctors tried to listen and direct me to the proper treatment, but just because good intentions doesn't mean that you're going to get good results or the ideal ones, because sometimes you might get sent to the wrong specialist, the wrong treatment might be done because it's really not this, it's this. Maybe neck traction works in some cases, but you don't want to do it in other cases because that can make it worse. Thankfully, I didn't have to go through that, but some people do. But other doctors, I feel like they just kind of want to hear what they want to hear, or if it's not something that's the typical or the easy, they're just kind of be like, there's no deal with this. Like the one neurosurgeon I said who looked at my images like, I don't see any herniations. It's like, that's not what I'm looking for. I'm asking about like further up a little bit. Anything look a little weird? Just because it's not something like simply like a herniation or something doesn't mean anything. And even so, MRIs aren't the be-all, end-all, because sometimes they can find something that is just not actually what's causing the issue. They might be looking and it's just incidental and it's non-symptomatic. So they should be careful with that, and everybody should.
What have been some of your challenges along the way?
Trying to find people that are doctors that would listen or give a proper diagnosis, trying to fight brain fog, battling, chronic pain throughout most of my life, and trying to, be able to even like work without like doing further damage, just because of having to suffer through, now like the headaches have gotten worse and worse, that when they're happening, it's like I can't even look at a computer screen or my phone, or sometimes just reading too much will do it, or thinking too much might trigger headaches or something. So it's been pretty difficult at times. When I have a day where it's really good, it's like such a surprise. Yeah, and then work has become difficult to the point where, I can't do work really that involves sitting down. I can't do my old job where I had to like move my neck around a lot in different positions. So, I can't do that. So physical labor is out. Computer like labor is like out. At least I can't do anything that's substantial. It's very difficult, and you start to feel very useless, and kind of wondering like what is life supposed to be, and having to resort your desire for life and what you're expecting, because everybody kind of develops that as they grow up. But when something like this happens, it can be very traumatic, and you have to really rethink your values and everything in order to make life enjoyable and worth it for you. And it should be, but it's been a journey.
And how have you had to advocate for yourself?
So making sure that when I'm having issues, trying to contact like doctors and get some good answers, making sure that when I'm, talking to doctors, like you have to really word things in a appropriate way so that you don't sound hypochondriacal, and immediately have them plug their ears and not listen to you, but also be able to get the information out. And I feel like I have to kind of like feel it out and be very careful. You kind of like tell them like, oh, okay, well, I'm feeling this way. I'm not really sure what it is, but I heard someone mention this, and I just kind of want to talk to them and just kind of see what their thoughts were on this. And, it's tough because, if you're someone that calls back every single day or once a week, then, they're going to start to kind of think you're hypochondriacal. And again, of course, depending on your condition, I don't think you're hypochondriacal. So it's a battle. I'm trying to find how to go about it appropriately.
I wholeheartedly agree. So thus far, what kinds of treatments have you tried for the CCI and AAI, the EDS, and POTS?
So with the EDS, really was mostly physical therapy, but because of how loose my knees are and potentially that causing also lower back pain, so started wearing leg braces, and that seems to have helped reduce a little bit of the knee pain and at least stabilize it so that I wasn't like falling over myself as much. Even something as simple as wearing boots that go over my ankle that are just enough tight fitting to keep that a little bit stable so I'm less likely to fall over. So that's where I've been working right now. And I do think for a lot of people, physical therapy can be beneficial depending on the area of the body. I feel like it's really helped with my shoulders and my lower back when I actually do it and everything. Now, it might not work for everybody. I feel like for my neck, it's kind of might not be helping, but that's a different condition and everything. That's from the CCI, AAI. It may be causing something that's, I don't know. But I've talked to the doctor, though, and I've kept them in the loop, which I think is important. And so with the CCI, AAI, the doctor recommended I wear like a neck brace. I currently wear one called the Aspen Vista. Other people might use a Miami J or some other type. For me, I like the Aspen Vista, and I really do feel like it tends to help. So that's kind of what I'm doing. They're trying to do more conservatively right now, hopefully so I don't have to get surgery. I do take medications for like, migraines and other kind of, and Tylenol for pain, things like that. And it helps. It's not perfect, but it helps. Definitely trying to be good to yourself, be kind to yourself, and do things to make you feel good about yourself.
So of all the treatments that you've tried, what has worked for you so far?
Tylenol, the PT in certain parts, and the neck brace, and avoiding certain other activities. The knee braces have all helped. When I'm having my knee pain is acting up a little more, I do use a cane. So it's just kind of things like that, really. There are plenty of people who are way worse off than I am. It can be very debilitating depending. So I really don't have it as bad as some people do.
How do your conditions impact your life?
Well, I don't really do a lot of running around as much anymore because that aggravates things. I doing activities where I have to tilt my head back and looking up, tilt my head down. All those things can increase the pain and dizziness, nausea, things like that. So even for my leisure activities, it's been difficult because I like to do lots of arts and crafts, and I've had to adapt a lot in order to be able to continue my hobbies as best I can and create some good enjoyment in my life and recreation.
So what is daily life like for you with your chronic conditions?
Wake up and kind of first be like, okay, let's see what hurts today. Often I need to do a lot of stretching in the morning. Everything's very tight. It's kind of sore. Often in the morning, I'll try to take the Tylenol or something to try to ease some of the finger pain. And for right now, on good days, I can kind of go out and maybe do a little bit of shopping. It's just, I've found that more so nowadays that going out and doing activities are just much more exhausting. So I come home and I just feel very fatigued and drained and just want to lie down or do something very simple. So because right now I am not able to work, I just try to make the best of my days with the little activities I can. And sometimes I have to push myself if I want to try to do something even clean a little bit, do something like that. It can be exhausting, but I like to put on maybe some music or a podcast, an interesting video, and just listen to it. And sometimes that can kind of help push me through in order to do some of the tasks I need to do. But I haven't been able to do, I've had to sell all my really nice tools, power tools, stop working on my car, and it just some days just having to take it easy. And it's definitely when I'm having when the flare up is over, it's making me appreciate it that much more.
So speaking of How do you cope with the symptoms of your condition? Like, how do you mentally and physically get through your day?
So things like I try to focus on are like, I know that this moment is temporary and that what I'm feeling like now won't keep existing. And that sometimes can kind of get me through because every moment's different. Nothing's permanent. At least that's what I tell myself. I guess it's kind of like a little bit of like a little Buddhist kind of thing or whatever, but kind of looking at things like that. I try not to blame myself. I feel like for myself, I feel in the past, like trying to put a meaning to everything was causing me more psychological harm than to just think that there is no meaning behind the, having a condition and the pain. I feel like you can kind of drive yourself crazy trying to feel like, what did I do to deserve this and this and that? And that's not really a useful question to be asking or helpful, because what if it's not? And it sucks, but it's like, just kind of, I don't know. For me, even though I know that sounds maybe a little bit nihilistic, but I feel like that kind of in some ways be comforting, and at least you can kind of direct yourself into creating the meaning you want for your own life and not basing it off of everybody else's views on what the meaning of life is. And for leisure activities, like I've always been, since I was a kid, a big video game person. Even though I can't really always afford the newest and bestest games, I'm usually good at bargain hunting, and immersing myself in an interactive story can be very uplifting and can kind of be, that little bit of escapism is nice. Or interacting with certain games where you can kind of simulate some kind of aspect of life that, you can't do anymore, maybe. I don't know if maybe for some people that would be maybe worse or would hurt them, but for me, I guess like it's like bittersweet. Like I'm like, oh, my Animal Crossing island, I can plant a whole bunch of camellias and take care of them. And I'm like, well, in real life right now, that's not an option, but at least I can kind of pretend. But things like that, good stories, listen to good things, educate myself about just a new subject I was curious about. For me, those things bring me great enjoyment, and that helps me push through.
What do you feel like has been your greatest triumph or triumphs against your diagnosis?
Yeah, I'm not really sure, because the conditions are, like Ehlers Danlos is a genetic condition, so unless they're somehow able to fix the gene and then somehow like rebuild my body from scratch with it or something, there's really no quote unquote cure. It's just really just symptom management. So there's just the triumph really would be lying in managing those symptoms and being able to push through any kind of like, hopelessness and melancholy that may come with it.
How do you use social support, and how does it help you?
So social support can be very helpful. It depends. I have found like some like Facebook groups or some online groups can be very beneficial, finding that kind of sense of camaraderie. Again, it depends, because some of these communities aren't as warm and inviting, or at least supportive to each other. You really have to kind of find one that fits you and everything. But finding others that going through the same thing and helping, you helping them one day when they're having it rough, or they helping you when you're having it rough another day, that can really help. I feel having that person to talk to and like lean on when you need them.
Do you have any worries or fears about the future? Of
course. I worry, like, if I'm like sometimes using a cane now, does that mean in the future I'm going to be wheelchair bound, or, because there's a lot of ifs, because things can get potentially worse, or maybe some of the physical therapy will actually help it. But the unknown feeds fear very efficiently. So I do worry about if I'm going to become incapacitated at some point and not be able to fend for myself. That's one of my biggest fears, I'd say, or my family.
And what are your goals for the future?
So I want to do what I can to adapt myself to my condition as best as possible and do whatever I can so I can enjoy the hell out of life as much as I can despite this. I'm learning a lot about myself through this, and I'm finding a lot of things that make me feel good about myself regardless. And I think that, plus surrounding yourself with people who are able to respect you and at least attempt to understand you, can make all the difference.
So you've talked about earlier how you've had to advocate for yourself, but how would you recommend that others advocate for themselves?
Well, it's tough for me to say how others should advocate for themselves because everybody's situation and perspective is going to be different. I'd say trying to be thoughtful and calculating as best as you can when dealing with physicians and other professionals regarding and seeking diagnoses, and trying to think from their perspective of what they're seeing in order so that at least hopefully you can communicate a little bit better. Obviously there needs to be something on their end too, but I feel like, being able to communicate as effectively as reasonably possible can be helpful, and not be a woman because you're going to have problems with misogyny, unfortunately.
What are some things that people should say to someone who has a chronic illness?
Like me, I don't want to get too much, quote unquote, pity, but at the same time, I like to feel like that someone is concerned with me and is willing to lend a hand and ask if I need anything. I do enjoy that. Even if I don't, just sometimes them asking can be very nice, and knowing that other people do care. So I want to hear, someone say when they ask me how am I doing, and be okay with maybe a long answer sometimes and not just be saying it because they're just programmed to say, how are you doing? Great. Okay. Despite the fact that maybe I'm not okay, and be okay with listening and then what should they not say? Definitely, they shouldn't say things that are invalidating. It's very tough, and it's something that I do. But trying not to say something invalidating, it's okay, it'll get better, or somehow turning the conversation to be just onto them. People mean well, and they want to say, oh yeah, my joints hurt too. And you're like, well, my knee can dislocate when my kid runs up and bumps into it, which has happened before. I don't think yours does that. So people just need to be, I think, gentle, understanding, willing to reach out, even when the other person who suffers from chronic illness doesn't always reach out. Obviously, a friendship comes both ways, but sometimes it's very hard for those who suffer to reach out because you kind of have this feeling I don't want to make someone else upset. And it's a nice surprise every now and then of checking in is I think, called for.
What do you wish people understood about invisible illnesses like yours?
That there's a lot of mental pain that comes with it, and that it's not something that you can just suck up and deal with. Chronic pain is very taxing on both the mind, body, soul, if you will. It really saps your resources, and we often get tired really easily. Sometimes our moods can become a little erratic at times. Hopefully not too bad, but depending on, when you're constantly suffering pain, every now and then you kind of just snap and you're just I just can't deal with this anymore. And be gentle if sometimes they say something that they don't really mean, or they just need to vent because maybe they don't have someone that they can kind of safely and comfortably vent to, and it just kind of pours out in the wrong place at the wrong time.
My last question is, are there any resources that you would recommend?
So for Ehlers Danlos, the Ehlers Danlos Society is a wealth of resources, information for not just people who have Ehlers Danlos, but have the related hypermobile spectrum disorders, which good luck trying to find a doctor that knows what you're talking about when you mention that, but there it is. And trying to sometimes actually for AAI, CCI, that one's going to be a little bit more difficult to find information on. When you do research, you have to be careful because there are some, in my opinion, quacks who try treating it, and you can easily fall right into their snare. Yeah, it's really difficult. I ended up going into some Facebook groups basically, and then some people kind of listed up some of the physicians that were experts in this, and just kind of doing my own individual research and just being cautious and talking to some other professionals who were familiar with those professionals or something to kind of get an idea, because one time I was like, I wonder what this one doctor is, and then kind of looked into it, and they were like, oh yeah, this guy's botched a bunch of surgeries. I'm like, yeah, I probably don't want to go to this one. You kind of press a little bit further. It's just be careful. There's a lot of quackery out there, and unfortunately they love to prey on people who are suffering from illnesses that don't have either a treatment or have a really sucky treatment and promise them a miracle, and they can't follow through on that.
Well, Louis, thank you so much for taking the time out to share your story and your suggestions. It's really been a pleasure having you on the show today.
Thank you very much, Jessica. Live long and prosper.
All right, everyone, that's it for our show. Join us next time on The Spoonie Struggle. Well, that's it for our show. To find out more, join us at www.thespooniestruggle.com. That's Spoonie, Spoonie. Check us out on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at The Spoonie Struggle. Please help us out by giving us 5 stars on iTunes and leave us a review so fellow Spoonies can find out what you like about us and discover their community in which to thrive. See you next time on The Spoonie Struggle.